Hello and welcome back to The Basement. This is the third and final episode of the Rack of Base build series. In this episode, we're going to recap how I got to this finished product. We're going to cover the finishing touches on the neck rests, the padded upholstery, and then of course applying finish, my favorite part of any build project, unless it's paint. Let's get after it.
All right, so I'm going to get started with one of the most boring parts of the whole project, and that is actually scraping off all of the excess epoxy. Now, what I've found to be a easy way to do this, or at least easy-ish, is to take a heat gun, and I'm just using a 5-in-1 tool, so basically a paint scraper, and heating up the epoxy with the heat gun and just kind of scraping it off. The heat gun softens it up just enough so that it comes off pretty easy. Still just a lot of work to do. Then after I scrape it all off with the heat gun and the paint scraper, I take the belt sander with a 80 grit sandpaper and just hit up all the joints where there's end grain and obviously differences in elevation between those joints where they didn't quite sit flush. So I take all that down with the belt sander. Then I hit everything with a random orbital sander to get some of those deeper scratches out. I'm using 80 grit paper as well on the random orbital sander for the first pass. And here what I'm doing is I'm taking CA glue and the original mica powder that I used to dye the epoxy and fill in any air bubbles that have revealed themselves since I scraped and sanded. So there's quite a few spots I have to do that on. All right, so I'm taking the router here with a 45-degree chamfer bit, and I'm hitting the inside of the bottom stretchers. I just want to soften up that edge because that's where the bodies of the guitars are going to sit and actually make contact with those stretchers. So I just want to round those over a little bit with a 45-degree chamfer. That'll give it more surface area to contact with the pad and the body of the guitar. So I just got lots and lots of detail sanding. And now I got to fix a bunch of these cracks that didn't fill with the epoxy because they were just too fine. So again, I'm just taking the mica powder that I used for the dye for the epoxy, and I'm kind of putting it on the cracks and the air bubbles that have surfaced, and just flooding it with CA glue, and then hitting it with accelerator and then sanding it down again. Now that all of the rough sanding is done, I am just taking some naphtha to it and just wiping it down, making the grain pop a little bit before I do the final sanding. And while that's drying, I am working on these crazy neck rests. I'm really regretting all the different surfaces and facets that I put in for all these pieces. And remember, I made 10 of these essentially. I'm only putting 8 on the rack to start with, but there's a lot of different flat surfaces that I have to sand and go through the 3 grits that I'm using. Starting at 80, then I'm going to 120, then I'm going to 220, and that's where I'm stopping. All right, now that I've got the sanding done, it's time for me to put the first coats of finish on, and I'm using just a Watco Danish oil. So I'm just using that for a light wipe-on coat just to make the grain pop, and as you can see, the epoxy looks great. So now it's time to do the same thing on the rest of the rack of base. Anybody's done this on a project before, starting to apply a finish like a rubbed on oil, this is, always one of the highlights of any build project like that, and like this, is to see that grain pop with the finish for the first time. So I'm really happy with it. I mean, again, the epoxy fill for the cracks and all the defects, that's it's a really, really subtle touch, but it makes it more stable, stronger, and if you're really looking closely, you can see those details, and it's kind of makes it an interesting piece, in my opinion.
Whew. Well, I'm back. It is a couple of nights later since I finished applying the first coat of Danish oil. And before I put any more finish on, namely the wax, and I probably want to do at least one more coat of Danish oil, I want to get the upholstery on, or at least sort it out. So I've experimented with a couple of different things. I've tried sections of foam pipe insulation, which is pretty close to what I want. With very little trimming I would have to do. However, they don't come in lengths that I want. I want to upholster one piece. So I think I'm going to use the original blue padded foam. I'm going to sacrifice my bench mat. This thing's seen better days, and I can always get another one. Heck, I've had this. This was my first backpacking sleeping pad. How the heck I've managed to keep this since I was 12 or 13, I don't know. I don't throw gear, camping gear away. So I've used this for other things like, shooting mats and all different kinds of stuff over the years. So it's proved to be useful. So I'm gonna use, this is long enough to span the bottom stretchers. So I'm gonna cut a couple of strips that are 2 and 2 1/4, 2.5 inches wide, because I just need to cover the corner here. I don't necessarily need to cover all of the stretcher, so I want to leave as much wood as possible. So there's not a whole lot of contact patch with the guitar body. So let me put this in place. So I want to, everywhere where the guitar is going to touch wood, I want to pad with this blue foam. So let me show you what this looks like. So you can see, I put a probably about a 1/4 inch, maybe 3/8 inch wide 45-degree chamfer on the inside edges here, just to give a little bit more of a contact patch. But really, that's the only spot where the guitar body is hitting. So I'm thinking I want to do, leave maybe a 1/2 inch of wood to 3/4 of an inch of wood on both, just on the upper edges, just to have as much wood showing as possible. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. So I want to upholster this foam. I don't want to just have glued foam in place. I could. It really wouldn't be that bad. Just to make things more of a challenge and more of a pain in the butt, I brought some blue velvet. Now this is upholstery grade blue velvet, something similar to what you would use on a sofa. So I've had a couple people warn me through Facebook groups that I'm a part of, be careful because, well, it can stain lacquer. And that's a good point. It really is. I don't think that's going to be the case with this fabric. Only time will tell. But I'm going to chance it. Again, it's the spot where it's going to impact non-painted wood is very, very minimal. I don't think it's going to stain it. Anyway, if it does, then there's another project for me to fix. But I think it should be fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out the foam. I'm going to do the bottom stretchers first. Once I do the bottom stretchers, then I'm going to start tackling these. The plan is to attach the fabric to the padding with spray glue. Now I've done a test and it does remarkably well. The spray glue sticks really well to this foam padding. It actually kind of melts the padding a little bit. So it definitely sticks really, really well. What I didn't like was these corners. I don't want the corners to look like poop. Let me put you on a tripod. So what I don't want is I don't want the corners to look crappy. So this is different than like doing Tolex or something, because, well, with Tolex, you've got something hard that you can push against, so you can use dabs of super glue. And unfortunately, I don't think it's going to really work that well. What I think would work well is sewing it, which adds another degree of complexity. So I was also worried about whether or not this would stick to the wood. So I did, especially with the corner piece, I don't think I'm going to have a problem inside of the neck rests, but I did try stapling this on a corner just to see how it would work.
and it works. So worst case scenario, I put a whole bunch of staples, and then I can use some fabric glue and put some piping down to cover where the staples are going. Hopefully I won't need to do that. I think if I just apply a good clamping pressure with a clamping caul across the bottom edge, you know, go in the two directions that I'm going to need to cover for the corner, I probably will be good. So all that means is I have to get my clamping strategy in order before I start applying the spray glue. And I think I'm not gonna spray the actual, I'm not gonna spray the stand, I'm gonna spray the upholstered padding. And we'll just see how it goes. If it pops off, then there's other ways I can attach it. I could even use, ideally I would just use staples and then piping to cover the staples. I think that would probably be the best way to go. But anyway, the extra degree of complexity for adding a couple of stitches per corner. I'm gonna have 4 corners times at least 8 of these neck rests, plus 2. I'm just gonna run one long piece along the bottom edge here, both of the bottom stretchers. So I'm looking at a lot of sewing, and sewing is not my strong suit. So we'll see how long I have patience for that. I'm gonna take some measurements, get to some cutting. I'm going to do the bottom stretchers first, and we'll just see how long this takes. Yeah, I have a feeling this might take me more than one night, but we'll see. Cue the time-lapse mode. So I'm just trimming out the first couple of pieces, just using a fresh razor and my square here as a straight edge. And then I'll do the same thing with the blue velvet that I selected. So I'm trying to leave about 3/4 of an inch going all the way around the pad with the fabric, so I have enough room to fold it over the edge and onto the back. So that should leave about a 1/2 inch fold over on all 4 sides. So first I spray glue it down and clamp it in place, leave it sit for about 5 minutes or so. It is an instant bond, but I still want to put a little bit of clamping pressure on it, and it seems to work. All right, so now I got to figure out how to do the corners. I changed my plan a couple of different times. This is not an area of specialty of mine. Yeah, I don't sew very well, and I've never really done Tolex. So the limited upholstering that I've done really just been on like speaker grills and things like that. So rounding corners is not my specialty. So I like to sew these, and I'm using a yellow thread because, again, I figure if I have to go back and use a staple gun to attach this, I've got some 550 paracord of a similar color that I can use to kind of cover that. Use it as kind of like a piping. But anyway, I fumble through this first one. I make a few mistakes. I learn from those mistakes, and eventually I clean it up. And yeah. All right, so I've got my corners done. They should fold in like that. I can kind of see that. But I'm really tempted to use CA glue instead of the spray glue, because I feel like this is going to make a ginormous mess. I'm going to try one just like this, the way I planned originally. I think what I'm going to do is that, so I can peel off the masking tape and have less gluey mess to deal with. I think I am going to glove up. When I did the prototype
for the neck inserts, this was a problem. Like I said, it stuck really, really well. But there again, on that, I sprayed glue on both surfaces. On here, I only sprayed the one. So it does feel like it wants to move. So I'm gonna spray both surfaces this time. I gotta do the edges as well as the fabric. So this is gonna be a little challenge. I'm gonna go outside because I don't want to breathe this in. All right, glue is sprayed. I feel like I need to work fast here. What I don't want to do is touch the fabric. Yeah, this is pretty fast setting. I don't want to touch the parts of the fabric that's going to be exposed once it's on the rack. Wow, this really is instant bond. This is working really well. And only time will tell with the durability. But that looks, for an idiot amateur, I'm absolutely thrilled with how this is working. Now, the reason why I went with yellow thread is if I have to do piping, I've got some 550 paracord that's about the same color as that thread that I figured I would use as the piping in case I have to staple this to the rack. So I was thinking a contrasting color would be cooler than a color that blends in. Holy crap, dude. I am thrilled with that. That turned out really well. That was not nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. So I've got one more long one like this to do, and then 8 short ones. So let me go ahead and make this other one, get it to where it's at right now, off camera, and I'll come back.
All right, so these little boogers, these are the insides of the neck rest, obviously, and what I'm doing is I'm trying to cut an inside bevel 45 degrees where the fold is going to be so that it sits inside the neck rest better. I liked that idea better than just kind of squishing it in there. So I'm just using really long razor knife, a little cheapy that has the little break off segments, and it works great for slicing through that foam. And I'm just eyeballing it. I'm just trying to get it close. So learning from my mistakes on the stretchers, I learned to kind of cut those 45s on the foldovers so that it, you don't have to stick fabric to fabric on the back side. So this is my second prototype. First one, I couldn't figure out how to do the corners. Again, I was trying to do that just with spray glue and not sewing it. So this is my first prototype with the stitched corners. So I just try a little bit of super glue and some accelerator, and that seems to work for sticking it to the inside of the neck rest.
Okay, so it's the next night. I'm gonna try and get this thing finished. I didn't get much done off camera since last night. The only thing I did aside from knocking wood over, was try to figure out a way to round the corner with this stretcher upholstered pad. So what I did is I folded it in half. First I had to put some, I don't know if you can see the masking tape on there. I masking taped it to fold that in half, just to hold it enough in place to get it between these, sandwich it between these two boards and clamp it up. So it's been in the clamps for, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours this evening. I'm hopeful that it's going to remember the shape and make it easier for me to then glue it to the stretchers across the bottom. I'm trying not to have to staple it in place, but I'm afraid that because I opted not to do the same kind of cutout that I did here to make this 45-degree angle. I decided not to do it the opposite way because that's really the point of impact where the bodies of the guitars are hitting the wood stretchers. So I want that padding to be robust. I want it to be there. So I didn't want to remove material away from the point of impact of the bodies to the rack. So I opted not to do that. It was very deliberate and intentional. So I'm just hopeful that clamping it like this and leaving it like this is going to create a permanent crease so that it makes it easier for it to stay down with just the power of the glue, the spray glue. That's all I want to use if I can get away with it. If I have to, then I will use a staple gun, staple it in place, and then I'll probably pipe it with, like I said, the same color. The reason why I chose the color thread that I did was because I have some 550 paracord, that same shade of yellow that I think would look kind of cool in contrast with the blue velvet. So that may be what I end up having to do. Hopefully not, because I really don't want to. It's an extra step and it's just an extra level of detail. I don't want to have to do that, so let's just leave it at that. I like the way it's looking right now. But in the meantime, while I'm waiting for these to take their permanent shape, I've got to make 7 more of these little pads, so I'm gonna get after it. I want to get this thing done tonight. I may not get the second coat of Danish oil and several coats of wax on it tonight, but I want to get the upholstery on and get the guitars in the rack and see what it looks like. I'm dying to see this thing done. So let's get after it.
As you see here, after I did the prototype, I got kind of an assembly line process going where I'm just doing each step at a time to all 10 remaining it's 9 remaining pieces. So I make 9 of these, 9 more, so a total of 10. All right, so now I decide to get smart and make a template for the fabric. So I make it out of cardboard first, and trying to get as precise as I can with all my angles and edges. And it works okay. I decided to test it with a piece of paper using the template as the guide, cut out around that, and then see how it fits around the foam. And it works well enough to let it rip. So I start tracing it out on the fabric, and then I cut it up. Kind of a neat pattern when I go back and see the footage. All right, at this point, it's just pretty much rinse and repeat to get all of the fabric stuck to the foam pads. It's definitely a nerve-wracking process because you're really trying to be careful not to touch any of the exposed faces of fabric with your fingers all sticky with the spray glue. So it's definitely nerve-wracking. And now I get to do a bunch of sewing.
Okay, so I've got half of the neck rests upholstered and padded. I've got 4 more to do, 2 more spares. I'm going to do that off camera. What I want to do right now is I want to take the padding that goes on the stretchers out of the clamps and see if it held the corner and see how I want to glue these down. Again, I prefer to not staple these, but I may have to. If I do, like I said, I have some yellow 550 paracord that I'll just trim out and cover the staples with this. So hopefully I won't have to do that. So let's see what we got here. These have been in clamps for a few hours. So far, it looks promising. So I have a feeling I'm going to have to work fast. To get this glued down and get it back in the clamps on the rack. Alright, there's nothing to do but to do it. Although part of me wants to use super glue, because then I don't have to do it all at once. Alright, let's not overthink it. Let's just do plan A, see what happens. I think I'm happy with that. I think that works. Let's see if I can do it again. Alright, so here's 4 of the 6 guitars that are going to go on it right out of the gates. So I got the 73 Fender PJ. I've got the 2000 Mexican Jazz that I redid. Got the Ibanez SR805FF and the LTD B205 SM first vaulted maple. So ultimately, I'm digging how this is turning out so far. I think this is going to work really, really well. You can see I've got several different body styles here, and they're all interfacing with the bottom pads just the way I wanted to. If I had it to do over again, I probably would have given myself a little bit more cushion, extending closer to the uprights, but I think this is going to work. I'm really digging it so far. Now, it's going to take some getting used to get to not having my guitars on the walls for just to admire as I'm working during the day from home. But I'll be able to look at them in this crazy thing. All right, so that's going to do it for tonight. I've got 4 more of the neck rests that I've got to do the stitching on the corners on, and then it'll be pretty much done at that point. I'm going to let this sit in the tape overnight, see how well it does, and then assess whether or not I need to do some other things to better secure it. Super glue is certainly a possibility, but I'm just going to kind of play it by ear. I think ultimately the securest way is to staple it and then bind it with the paracord or something similar. But anyway, I'll see you tomorrow and we'll finish this thing up.
So well, now that I'm done with the neck rests and getting those all glued up, now it's time to take the padding that's on the stretchers out of the tape and see how the glue up went.
All right, I'm really pleased with how this is turning out so far. Now, when I started applying finish to this, I only did one super light coat of Danish oil because I remembered I had to do this and I didn't want to have a slick surface and I didn't feel like masking it off. I wanted to see what it looked like with a coat of oil on it. I couldn't help myself. So I want to apply, I've got enough here I think for one more light coat. Let that dry. Not as long as I should let it dry, but I'm going to let it dry. And then I want to put a couple coats of paste wax on it and then this thing will be ready to rock. It'll be completely done. So I'm going to start putting the last coat of oil on, trying not to saturate this. So back in a second, I'm going to go get a lint-free cloth. All right, I am super pleased with this. Like I said, I'm not sure how well the upholstered foam padding is going to be in terms of how well it sticks. But right now, I'm digging the color choices. I'm digging the adjustable neck rests. I'm digging tripping in my workshop. All right, thank you so much for watching the third and final episode of this Rack of Base build series. In retrospect, I don't know that I would change a whole lot with this build project. I love the end result. The adjustable neck rest was something I had envisioned from the very start, but when I drew it out, it just felt like it was too complicated. So I raced it a bunch of times and tried to come up with a simpler design that I could build faster. But once I built the uprights and the stretchers and I saw it at scale, I was like, man, I got to do what I originally thought up in my head. Now at that point, I didn't think of a way to set that top stretcher back with the funky bracketry that I did with those crazy lap joints until it was time to do it. So that was the learning process during the whole thing, was just being flexible and coming up with ideas, and I couldn't be more happy with the end result. This is awesome. So all this was really a means to end with this build project. The purpose of this was to get the guitars off the walls so that I can then turn my attention to building acoustic panels using the fabric that I got from Newcastle Fabrics, the scraps that I got that I did the PV cabinet with. So that's the next big build project that I'm trying to get done, is that. Then maybe I will do something about this pedal board. I really want to rework it. I'm not happy with its modularity and being able to switch things up. So I'm probably going to make something that's going to match the rack of bass. And then I need a road case for it, so why not make a road case? And then I need to write some music along the way. I need to actually track some of the things that I've written throughout this project, since having finished the 73 PJ bass, it's been an inspiration to play. Now that I've got it a little bit closer to dialed in. So after I get those things done, I'm going to invest heavily in some luthier tools specific to bass so that I can make a neck from scratch and start practicing getting these necks dressed properly, do possibly a refret job on the 73 PJ because it needs a refret. So I'm going to start learning some actual luthier skills that can translate into my first scratch build. I'll probably do a kit build before I do a scratch build. The PJ bass was kind of like that, but in reverse. Took it apart, fixed it, put it back together, and did all the finishing. So maybe getting in an extra rep, practice on my finishing skills will help. So I'm considering doing a kit build. But I am just rambling and rambling and rambling. My final thoughts is to give a sincere thank you to everybody who's watched any of the content that I've produced this year. It's meant a lot, honestly. I started 2020, I had 75, maybe 80 subscribers to the channel. I finished 2020 with 375, so that's a massive, massive change. And I think I gained most of those from the 73 PJ bass. And what's that shown me is a sense of community, honestly, because I've got a lot of good comments and feedback, not only from the viewers through YouTube comments, but also through the Facebook groups that I share the links to the videos on. Those have been tremendous, not only encouraging, but also constructive and critical feedback that's helped steer the course of some of these projects as they were in progress. So that sense of community is really, really awesome, and I can't thank you enough for it. This is something I would be doing regardless of having a YouTube channel. I think having the YouTube channel and starting a project helps me to get it finished, believe it or not, a little bit faster. It helps me not put things on back burners if I've got people interested in encouraging me along. So that's helped me finish a bunch of stuff this year that I probably would not have finished otherwise. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for your support. It's been unbelievable this year. I know I'm still a tiny, tiny channel compared to a lot of others, but still, the fact that anybody is giving any kind of attention to this or interacting with it at all is pretty cool. So thanks again. We'll see you in the next episode down here in the basement.